The town of Dry Creek carried the smell of dust, sweat, and old secrets, a place where everyone knew everyone and gossip spread faster than prairie fire. Kate Miller had lived her whole life in the shadow of its crooked wooden buildings and dry dirt roads, and still she felt like an outsider, as if the ground beneath her boots refused to claim her. Her father had been a rancher once, strong and proud, but the bottle stole him, turning him into a shell of a man who died hunched over in his chair before she was even grown. Her mother followed soon after, the sickness of grief pulling her under. Kate had been left behind, young but not innocent, with no inheritance except the knowledge that she had no one. That absence shaped her, hardened her hands with work, and left her heart raw with longing. She tried to belong, she truly did. She took on jobs nobody wanted, scrubbing laundry in the icy waters of the creek, cooking stews in the sweltering heat of saloon kitchens, sweeping floors where the boots of drunken men tracked mud and blood alike. The coins she earned were enough to keep her fed but never enough to earn respect. She would glance up from her chores to see women in pressed dresses passing by with parasols, their laughter light and cruel, and men tipping their hats to them with eyes full of approval. But when those same men looked at Kate, their faces twisted with disinterest or, worse, pity. At 22, her youth was fading in the eyes of Dry Creek's people. Suitors came and went for other girls, never her. She was told more than once, directly and indirectly, that she was not the kind of woman a man would take home. Too pale, they'd say, though she burned herself in the sun trying to darken her skin. Too broad-shouldered, though she had only grown strong from lifting buckets and kneading dough. Some whispered that she carried a curse, that tragedy clung to her blood. The words stuck, pressing into her skin until she half believed them herself. The cruelest phrase of all came not from strangers but from men she once thought of as friends, spoken with casual dismissal that cut like a knife: "No man wants her." On this particular evening, Kate had worked until her arms ached from scrubbing. The saloon smelled of whiskey and gunpowder, laughter spilling out into the street, but Kate left with her apron still damp and her heart heavier than ever. She walked with no real destination until the houses gave way to open land. The sunset blazed across the sky, painting the canyon rim in molten shades of red and gold. The beauty of it stung her, for it reminded her how small and unwanted she felt compared to the vastness of the world. She stood at the edge where the earth dropped into cliffs, the wind tugging at her golden hair, and at last the words spilled from her lips in a whisper that sounded more like a confession. "No man wants me," she said, the truth she had carried for so long echoing against stone and sky. The silence that followed was deep and unyielding, until a sound broke it, the faint scrape of stone beneath a boot. Kate spun around, fear rushing through her veins. From the shadows beneath the canyon wall, a man emerged. Not a townsman, not anyone she had seen before. His skin bore the bronze of sun and desert, his hair black and loose around his shoulders, his chest bare except for a string of beads and bones that rattled softly when he moved. His leggings were worn from travel, his moccasins coated with dust. And his eyes, dark, steady, unblinking, locked on hers with a weight that pinned her in place. Kate's breath caught. She had heard stories told in hushed tones, stories of Apache warriors who moved through land like ghosts, who struck fear in ranchers and soldiers alike. She knew she should scream or run, yet her feet refused to move. There was no weapon raised in his hands, only a presence that carried its own kind of power. He studied her for a long, unnerving moment. Then, with words marked by a careful accent, he asked, "Why do you speak so?" Kate's lips trembled. "Because it is true," she answered without thinking, the weight of loneliness cracking her voice. "No man here wants me. I'm nothing." The warrior tilted his head slightly, as though trying to measure the truth in her eyes. The wind whipped around them, carrying the last light of day, and his voice came again, low but clear. "If your people do not want you, why stay?" She blinked, stunned into silence. It was such a simple question, yet it struck her like lightning, burning through all the excuses she had ever made for remaining where she was unloved. She swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her apron. Where else would I go? This is my home. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long against the earth. Home is where life is, he said firmly. Not where you are broken. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had never heard words like that, never had anyone speak with such certainty. She should have turned back, returned to town, pretended this moment never happened. But the thought of going back to the sneers, the laughter, the whispers, it felt like a death sentence. The warrior extended his hand, not in softness but in command, his dark eyes steady on hers. Come, he said simply. You will live. Kate stared at his hand, torn between fear and longing. She thought of the empty room that waited for her in Dry Creek, the bed that felt colder with each passing year, the silence that gnawed at her every night. She thought of her mother's tired eyes, her father's wasted body, the cruel words spoken behind her back. And then she thought of this stranger, this man who was feared by the very people who rejected her, offering her a place without scorn, without hesitation. Her throat tightened as if her entire life had led her to this one moment. Slowly, almost against her own will, Kate reached out and placed her trembling hand in his. His grip closed around hers, warm and steady, as if to anchor her to the promise he had just spoken. Without another word, he led her away from the canyon's edge, away from the town that had never wanted her. The night fell over them like a cloak, stars waking in the dark sky as horse and rider carried her toward a life she could not yet imagine. For the first time in her life, Kate did not look back. Taza led Kate through the canyon trails as the sun dipped lower, the sky bleeding into shades of crimson and violet. She clung to the saddle blanket behind him, her fingers gripping tightly as the horse moved with a steady rhythm. The town behind her had grown small in the distance, swallowed by shadows, and with it went the life she had always known. Fear stirred in her chest, but beneath it something else rose too, a fragile spark of hope she had never allowed herself to feel before. She tried to ask questions, but the words caught in her throat. The night was alive with the sounds of crickets and coyotes, and his silence seemed to demand her own. When they reached the mountains, a hidden valley opened before her. Fires glowed in the distance, and she could make out small lodges built of hides and wood, their shapes blending with the earth. The smell of smoke and roasting corn drifted on the cool night air. Kate's heart pounded as faces turned toward her, children stopping their play, women pausing in their work, men lifting their eyes from sharpening arrows or tending horses. They all stared, not with the mocking laughter she was used to in Dry Creek, but with curiosity, caution, and something unreadable. Kate wanted to shrink back, to disappear into the shadows, but Taza dismounted and turned to her with a hand extended. She took it and slid to the ground, her legs shaky after the long ride. Taza's voice rang out clear and strong in his own tongue, words she didn't understand, but the people seemed to. They murmured among themselves. Some frowned, others tilted their heads. One older woman, her hair streaked with silver, stepped forward and studied Kate with eyes sharp as an eagle's. She spoke to Taza quickly, then looked Kate over once more before nodding and turning back toward the fire. Another woman, younger, offered Kate a cup of water without speaking. Kate hesitated, then drank, the coolness soothing her dry throat. It was the first time in years she felt someone had offered her something without judgment. That night she was given a place near the fire. A blanket was laid out for her, simple but warm. She lay down listening to the crackle of flames, the murmur of voices, the occasional laughter of children. It was strange, unsettling, but not cruel. No one spat at her, no one whispered, unwanted. She stared at the stars until her eyelids grew heavy, and sleep came faster than she expected. The days that followed tested her more than she imagined. Work began with the rising of the sun. Kate was shown how to grind corn between stones until her arms ached, how to gather berries and roots without mistaking them for poisonous ones, how to carry water from the stream without spilling a drop. The women moved quickly, their hands skilled, and Kate fumbled at first, clumsy and unsure. She heard their laughter sometimes, not mean-spirited but amused at her awkwardness. Yet no one pushed her away. They corrected her gently, guided her, and when she managed to complete a task, they nodded with approval. Slowly, she began to find pride in each small success. At night she sat by the fire listening to stories she couldn't yet understand, the cadence of the Apache tongue washing over her like a river. Taza often sat near, sharpening his knife or weaving arrow fletchings, his dark eyes flicking toward her now and then. He did not speak much, but his presence steadied her. When she burned her hands trying to lift a hot pot, he was the one who brought herbs to soothe the sting. When she stumbled on the trail carrying water, he was the one who took the load from her shoulders and carried it with ease. Yet doubt clung to her like a second skin. One evening, after the camp had gone quiet and the stars burned bright overhead, she whispered to him, her voice shaking, "Why did you bring me here? I don't belong. I have nothing to give." Taza set aside the arrow shaft he had been working on and looked at her steadily. "You are alive," he said simply. "That is enough." The words sank deep into her, though she struggled to believe them. For so long she had been told she was not enough, that her worth was measured in what men wanted from her. Yet here was a man who looked at her not with disdain but with recognition, as though he saw something she did not yet see in herself. The more time she spent among his people, the more Kate realized how much Taza carried too. He bore the weight of being called savage, outlaw, enemy. She heard the younger warriors speak of raids and battles, of soldiers and settlers who would rather see them gone. She saw in Taza's eyes a hardness born of survival, of loss, of being unwanted by a world that had no place for him except in fear. In that, they were alike. Both cast aside, both searching for something more than the labels others had chained them with. One day, as the sun hung high and hot above the valley, Kate worked alongside the women grinding corn. Sweat streaked her face, dust clung to her hair, and her arms shook with effort. But when she finished the task and the meal was shared, the older woman with silver hair placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke a few words in Apache, her tone kind. Kate didn't know the meaning, but she understood the intent. It was the first time in years she felt a measure of belonging. That night, sitting beside the fire, Kate watched Taza in the glow of the flames. His strong features were softened by the flickering light, his dark eyes reflecting the stars. Her chest tightened with something unfamiliar, something that frightened and comforted her all at once. She lowered her gaze, whispering almost without thinking, "No man wants me." The words had become a reflex, a wound she couldn't stop pressing. Taza turned to her, his expression firm. "One man does," he said. His voice was quiet but carried the strength of stone. "And that is enough." Kate froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night, and the world seemed to hold still around her. In that moment she saw herself not through the cruel eyes of Dry Creek, but through his, someone worth wanting, worth keeping alive. A woman who was no longer alone. And as the fire burned low and the night wrapped around them, Kate felt for the first time that she had stepped not into exile but into the beginnings of a life she had never dared dream of.